The New York Mets have had a revolving door at third base, but Brett Baty may finally be the answer.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the number one daily podcast of the New York Mets. If you want to find any of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Now, Brett Baty is coming off a very good season in 2025. Good enough that I think right now all of us would comfortably say, if asked the question, who's the starting third baseman of the New York Mets in 2026, I think consensus would be Brett Baty. But the funny thing about this conversation is we have been having it at third base for years now, where every time you think there's a solution to the position, things change. If we had this exact same conversation a year ago, it would be, man, Mark Vientos was a breakout star for the 2024 Mets, because he was. Mark Vientos is finally the answer at the position. Yes, you might have to stomach some subpar defense, but he's going to give you 40 home run power at third base. I remember last year doing shows talking about the combination of Mark Vientos and Pete Alonso, and how there was really few teams, if any, outside of maybe the Braves with Austin Riley and Matt Olson, that could match the power output that you expected from Mark Vientos and Pete Alonso. Now, Pete held up his end of the bargain. Mark Vientos did not, and that's why now here we sit, and it's Brett Baty again who has the keys to third base. You look at the numbers, it was a very good season for Baty, especially compared to expectations. Baty hit 254, 313 on base, 435 slug, 18 homers, 8 stolen bases, 50 runs driven in. He had a 111 WRC plus. WRC plus measures hitters on a league average of 100. That 111 WRC plus means he was 11% better than your league average hitter. He had a 2.3 F4, which is wins above replacements, according to Fangraphs. Amongst primary third basemen who got at least 300 plate appearances in 2025, Brett Baty ranked 14th in WAR and 13th in WRC plus. So that right there tells you he was a middle of the pack starting third baseman based on the numbers. And that's not bad. You'll take it, because Brett Baty, if he just replicates that season with a little more playing time. So let's just say you juice the home run total over 20, get that RBI total over 60, keep the WRC plus where it is, plays more defense at third base than at second base where he is more valuable, and you could be talking about a 3.5 win player. That's not bad for your starting third baseman. What makes you even more excited, though, is what he did down the stretch. Because in the second half, Brett Baty hit 291, a 353 on base, a 477 slug, 9 home runs in 55 games, and a 135 WRC plus. That WRC plus was third best among third basemen in the second half behind Miguel Andujar and Junior Caminero. He actually had a better WRC plus in the second half than Jose Ramirez. Now, Jose Ramirez had a 131 WRC plus and got way more plate appearances than Brett Baty. But still, it just shows you how impactful Baty was down the stretch, how much better he was playing, and really, you probably should have played more down the stretch. You look at the defense, Brett Baty was worth 4 defensive runs saved, 2 outs above average at third base, and at second base, he was worth 3 defensive runs saved, minus 1 outs above average. So the fact that he was even league average at second base is an incredible feat. But according to defensive runs saved, he was above average at second base. And both metrics, defensive runs saved and outs above average, agree that he was above average at the hot corner. Right now, you look at Brett Baty, he is about to turn 26 years old. So he is right in the middle of his prime. And the Mets have him under team control for 4 more seasons. So if you look at the third base position for the New York Mets and you look at the organizational depth chart, Brett Baty is far and away ahead of the pack. But again, a year ago, we were saying the exact same thing about Mark Vientos. Mark Vientos still probably has a higher ceiling than Brett Baty offensively. Ronny Mauricio could be a better third baseman altogether. He graded out great by the metrics defensively. And he does have a very good left-handed swing. Now, facing lefties, that's a different story. That's still an issue. But that's something that Ronny Mauricio could conceivably clean up. Send him out to the Winter League, have him play third base in all the games out there, see what it looks like at camp. Is Brett Baty already locked in as the Mets' opening day third baseman in 2026? I think it might be a little bit too early to just anoint him the answer. Because, again, these conversations are so fluid and they're so apt to change. Can we really say without a shadow of a doubt that Brett Baty has figured everything out based on his second half when he looked really good? Or is there a chance that the Brett Baty of old, unfortunately, could still creep back in? Can you go into next season and absolutely, without any doubt at all, say, yep, that's our guy? We don't need to acquire a third baseman. We can trade Ronny Mauricio. We can trade Mark Vientos. We can just roll out the red carpet, roll out the runway entirely for Brett Baty because he's the guy. I don't know if that's the case. And what I want to talk about in the next segment is what are the alternatives, both internally, which I think we have a pretty good understanding of, but also what else could the Mets do at the third base position if they started to look this offseason? If they looked at the free agent market and tried to see if they could get better at third, is there a path to a better Mets team in 2026 where Brett Baty is not the opening day third base? We're going to go through all those options in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA season's here, and FanDuel is an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if you win, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets. That's right. You pick a bet, you put down $5. If it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet, whether it's player props, building the same game parlay, even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes watching basketball that much more exciting. You got a little something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or you love diving into the stats, FanDuel is going to make the game day experience so much better. It's quick, it's easy. It's the best way to add a little more energy to your Sundays if you're watching football or any other day of the week when you got NBA action unfolding. So if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 15,000 subscribers. We're getting closer and closer. Really do appreciate all of you. Continue to subscribe. Now, what are the Mets' other options at third base? Internally, we know the three names that have been in the conversation the last couple of years. Brett Baty, Mark Vientos, and Ronny Mauricio. Vientos, though, if the Mets are serious about getting better defensively, which is one of the first things that David Stearns was harping on at his end of the season press conference, if that really is something that they're going to try to improve on, I don't know how you can't look at Mark Vientos this offseason and say, you know what, get a first base glove, work over there. You're done playing the hot corner. Because at the end of the day, the best he can probably muster at third base is league average if everything goes right. And the thing is, with a bad defender, those tendencies can always creep to the surface, especially if you're not hitting, which is what we saw this past season. Whether it was the defense carrying over to the offense carrying over to the defense, it just was not a good season for Mark Vientos. I think you simplify a lot of things for him if you just make him a first baseman. And I don't think that really impacts his trade value whatsoever. I think whoever would trade for Mark Vientos knows they're trading for the bat. I don't think there's any team that's thinking, yeah, we got to get him here because here he's going to play a better defensive third base. You might still stick him at third if that's the makeup of your roster. But he was worth minus 10 defensive runs saved, minus 7 outs above average, and even at his best in 2024, minus 6 defensive runs saved, minus 6 outs above average. For me, I'm not saying, hey, you got to ship Vientos out, because I think there's a world where Mark Vientos could be your DH, or if he does work really hard at first base, maybe he could be good enough at the position at some point during the season where you're getting live looks at him and Pete Alonso if you re-sign Pete, and you might decide, you know what, Vientos is the better first baseman, and then he takes over the position and Pete just DHs. I think those are all realistic outcomes potentially, but the world where Mark Vientos ends up being the answer at third base again, I just don't know if I see it. So when I look at this position, to me, I'm moving Vientos to the other side of the infield on the depth chart. Now, Ronny Mauricio is the ultimate contingency plan. And I think here's the one thing that ended up working out for the Mets by preserving his option is you can go into camp without any clear path to Ronny Mauricio making the team. You could start him off in Syracuse, let him play every day there, and if Brett Baty isn't performing or if there's an injury, Ronny Mauricio can be the first man up. Ronny Mauricio, in a limited amount of playing time, again, the defensive metrics loved him. 4 defensive runs saved, 5 outs above average. So I like Mauricio as a fallback, but I don't think you can go into camp expecting Mauricio to be your starting third baseman. Now, behind all of those guys in the farm system, Jacob Reimer is the heir apparent. He's the next guy to look at third base. He played 61 games in Double-A and had a great bat in both High A and Double-A. Hit himself into being considered a top 100 prospect in baseball. Now, defensively, he's not great either. He's not going to be probably as good as Brett Baty has become at third base. But you never know. It's early. You don't want to completely write him off. But it's more likely than not that the bat's going to have to carry him at the position. And I also don't think that it's going to carry him to the big leagues necessarily in 2026. I wouldn't rule it out, but I wouldn't expect it. So internally, it really is sort of Baty or bust at the third base position with the fallback plan of Ronny Mauricio. Now you look at the external options, and for agency, there's 3. You got Eugenio Suarez, who's already 34 years old. The problem with him is he's coming off arguably a career best season, so he's going to want to get paid. Is he going to want a 3-year deal? Are you willing to see what age 35 and 36 Eugenio Suarez looks like? And he turns 35 in June, I believe. So I just don't know if that makes sense, especially if you're trying to get better defensively. It's kind of the same conversation that you're having with Mark Vientos. I mean, Gino is definitely better than Vientos, but he's not a good defender, and he's not going to get better as he ages. Now, Alex Bregman is clearly the best third baseman on the market. He's going to be entering his age 32 season, but he's coming off a year where, despite injuries limiting him to 114 games, he was still worth 3.5 wins above replacement. Walks a ton, doesn't strike out, still has pop, hits for a good average, great leader in the clubhouse. Alex Bregman would make the Mets better. I just don't know if you're going to sign Bregman and Pete Alonso. So that would be a choice that you might be making of bringing in Bregman over Alonso. And I think that makes your offense take a step back. Now, Bregman would improve you drastically as a defensive team. Just having him at third base at all times would be huge compared to what they've had in years past. I think, Brett Baty and Bregman, the defensive difference is probably a little bit more minimal. But again, the impact that he would have on the clubhouse, Bregman, that's hard to quantify, but I think he would be a really good culture fit to just help your team as become a winner. At the same time, I don't think that you get that much better with Bregman at third, relegating Baty to a utility role, and then losing Pete Alonso. So, you're filling what isn't entirely a hole at third base, and you're opening up one at first. Then you have Kazuma, Okamoto. And I still want to do a little more research on these Japanese free agents, just because you can read a Baseball Reference page, but how much does it really tell you? What I have read so far is that Okamoto is a more surefire option when it comes to the international market than Munetaka Murakami is, as far as just translating in 2026. Murakami has way more of a ceiling. He's younger. He's going to cost a lot more money, but there's more concerns about his ability to handle velocity and the changes to the game going from the MPB to MLB than Okamoto. Okamoto seems to be the high floor player, good defender. He could play third, he could play first, he could play a corner outfield spot. So you have a lot of flexibility there. He hit 15 home runs in only 69 games played this season as he was hurt. The 6 years prior to 2024, he hit 30 bombs every season. In 2024, he hit 27, but in 2023, he hit 41. So you get some pop. You get a guy that could plug third base or first. I think Okamoto is a very interesting free agent we'll be talking about more, but I don't think that Okamoto is a replacement for Pete Alonso. I think you can sign both, and then you'd make Brett Baty expendable on the trade market, or you'd have him as a utility guy could play third or second, because at second base, let's just say the Mets trade Jeff McNeil. Well, you could have a hole at second too. Yes, I think Jet Williams could contribute potentially as soon as opening day at second base, but that's not a given. Luis Angel Acuna has yet to hit in the big leagues. Ronny Mauricio probably better at third than he is at second. So you could conceivably move Baty to second base if you got a better option at third, whether that was Bregman, whether that was Okamoto, or even if the Mets actually did sign Gino Suarez. I think ultimately, I'm still prioritizing Pete Alonso above any other bat in free agency. And if you got Pete at first, you got whether it's Jet Williams or Jeff McNeil at second base. I think you have a pretty good option there. That's assuming you don't trade McNeil, but we'll talk about that on tomorrow's show. You got Lindor at short and Baty at third. It's a pretty good infield. But with all of this said, with where the Mets are at internally, with what's out in the market, and what I would still deem a pretty unlikely target in Bregman, and then who really knows how the market's going to materialize for Okamoto, it does still seem like most roads lead to Brett Baty as your starting third baseman. Is there any road, though, that could lead Brett Baty to getting traded? Is there a player on the market that would be worth it to have even more uncertainty at third base, but the player or the pitcher you're acquiring is enough to say, you know what, we're fine. We will trade you Brett Baty. That's where I want to close the show here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. The NFL season's back, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in a stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting those tickets can be a hassle between queues, login screens, prices jumping at checkout. It's frustrating. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. Game Time is fast, it's easy, and it's backed by the Game Time guarantee. So you're always going to get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included. So the price you see is the price you pay. The app made it super simple. I can view my seat before I buy, so I know exactly what to expect when I arrive. I can buy tickets in a matter of seconds. And also, I can hop on a zone deal where I'll pick the section and Game Time will pick the seats. And I got to save big when I did this the last time I went to a Mets game. Honestly, it's the fastest, cheapest, and least stressful way to go to the game. So if you want to buy tickets, download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service. We get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. Take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways and a live graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. So, let's talk about whether Brett Baty is untouchable in trade talks. I think he is not quite untouchable, but he is very unlikely to be moved. For example, if the White Sox call up and they say, you want Luis Robert? We'll do it for Brett Baty straight up. I'm hanging up the phone. Okay, Luis Robert could be a nice fit for the Mets, but not for Brett Baty straight up. And I almost wouldn't even trade Mark Vientos for Luis Robert straight up because it's 4 years of Vientos for an expensive year of Robert. There is a circumstance where I would, as I've talked about on this show, and I'm still not totally sold on it, but the idea of maybe packaging Jeff McNeil in a Luis Robert trade So you're getting off a salary to take on a salary, and then you give them a player like maybe a Vientos that they covet. Maybe that's something I could see, but Brett Baty in that trade, no chance. At the Brewers, say, hey, we love Brett Baty if you want Freddie Peralta. I'm not doing that deal because Freddie Peralta's a rental. I'm trying to trade prospects to get Freddie Peralta. Same thing with Sandy Alcantara. Now, maybe I consider that one a little bit more because it's 2 years of team control, but ultimately, unless you've already signed a third baseman and have a contingency plan already buttoned up at the position, like if you've already decided, hey, we're going for Bregman instead of Alonso, and you already made that move, well, then at that point, yeah, Brett Baty becomes a lot more available in trades because all of a sudden, first base is your bigger hole. And yeah, Baty could fill that position theoretically, and I think he'd adapt to playing first base probably a little bit better than Vientos would, but he doesn't really have the power you want from the first base position. And you could probably fill first base cheaper than third base if you've already signed Bregman, for example. Like you can then go out and get a plug and play guy, whether it's a Carlos Santana to platoon with Vientos, which isn't great because actually Carlos Santana's a switch hitter anyway, but at least I think he is. Regardless, he's not coming off a good season, but you could get one of those veterans, whether it's Santana or Goldschmidt, or you can make a run at Josh Naylor and pay a lot less than you're going to pay Pete Alon. I mean, there's options. You could trade for a first baseman and find some team's option. And again, Vientos could very well be the answer if you got a third baseman as talented as Alex Bregman. But again, I don't necessarily think the Mets are going to prioritize Bregman in free agency. I think they're going to prioritize Pete. And so if Pete's your first baseman and third base is once again the same conversation we've been having, you really can't trade Brett Baty. I think the one trade that would potentially make sense to put Baty on the table is Tarek Skubal. There's really not much that you can take off the table if you're really trying to go after Skubal. I think Nolan McLean is the one clear cut. Yeah, we're not trading him. And I think Carson Bench should be in that camp as well. I did a full show on this where I even said, quite honestly, with where the Tigers are at, with the fact that they have Kevin McGonigal, who should be ready to go at some point next season, if not on opening day, they wouldn't even necessarily need Jet Williams as much. And so what would really entice them more is the pitching that you could send back the other way. And we talked through all of that. But if they decided, hey, Brett Baty would be the best option that we could have starting at third base next season, and he probably would be based on their current, construction of their roster. And it's, hey, we'll do this trade if it's Brett Baty and Jonah Tong as the two big pieces coming back. It's hard to say, well, you can't trade Brett Baty. And so that's the only thing I really wanted to get across with this segment. At this point in time, I think if I had to just grade percentage of likelihood that these players will be back with the Mets, Brett Baty on a scale of 0 to 100%, I think 95% chance he's going to be back with the Mets. That 5% outlier is if they decided to pivot in free agency and get Bregman. Well, now he becomes a lot more available. Or also, if there is a piece like Skubal, who you really think is going to be the missing piece that makes you a legitimate World Series contender, I don't think that you could have Brett Baty be the sticking point in getting that deal done if it's going to make you that much better. And then, of course, you have to have a follow-up plan in place at third base, and one that's better than just, hey, we hope Ryan Mauricio can do it. Or we hope Mauricio can do it, and if not, we got Vientos playing third base again. I think that, again, on a scale of 0 to 100%, Brett Baty is most likely going to be with the Mets next year, and he's most likely going to be the opening day third baseman, and I think rightfully so. I think that really is the smartest allocation of resources because I think defensively, he can do a lot of what Alex Bregman can. Leadership-wise, obviously not, but offensive upside, I'm not saying he's going to be Alex Bregman, but in the second half last year, if he was that guy again, it's a really good third baseman overall. I don't know if he could post a 130 WRC plus over the full season, but I wouldn't say that that's completely off the table either. So I think Brett Baty has enough ceiling and now high enough floor where he should be your answer. Now, if I play the same game with some of these other Mets, what are the chances that Mark Vientos is back with the Mets or traded? That to me is more a coin flip. It's getting on the verge of 50-50. I think Ronny Mauricio, you're probably looking more 70-30. He's going to stay just because he has the option and he is a good contingency plan in a lot of different spots for the Mets. So I think they hold on to the upside play there. But again, you really don't know. Brett Baty, though, deserves a lot of praise for the way he handled this past season. He put together a really good year. And I think the Mets could do a lot worse at third base next season. And I really do hope that he is given the opportunity to play third base and to play third base every day, to not be platooned, to just get a chance to be the guy. Because I think defensively, he makes the Mets better. And I really do think that there is still that offensive upside that he can tap into where Brett Baty might be able to run into 25 homers. He hit 18 last year without being an everyday player. And he hit 9 in 55 games in the second half. Quick math says average out 9 home runs across 55 games and multiply it by 162 game season. It's about 25 homers, I would think. Because I know 55 times 3, that's what, 165? So over 165 games, 27 homers. Yeah, give or take, right? About 25 bombs. I think Brett Baty at his best can hit 270 in the big leagues. I think he can get on base at a 350 clip. I think he can slug at a 450 clip, honestly. I think Brett Baty could be an 800 OPS third baseman who plays really good defense, but I think that's the ceiling. I think the floor is, a 740 OPS and a 3-win player at the position, which, again, you can do a heck of a lot worse. The New York Mets have a lot of questions that they have to answer this offseason. I think third base is a slight question. But I think if you go into the season with Brett Baty as the incumbent, and then you have Ronny Mauricio and Jacob Reimer in the farm system, and you always know that if worse came to it, you could address the position at the deadline, I think the Mets are fine not signing a Bregman, not signing Gino Suarez, not signing Okamoto, although there is some merit to signing him anyway. It's a guy that could help in a lot of spots. I think Brett Baty is the guy at third base, and I hope that he can prove enough this upcoming season where he remains the guy at third base for years to come. Because he was always supposed to be that guy, and I have not given up on Brett Baty and Francisco Alvarez being real big-time impact players at the big league level for the New York Mets. As much as everyone's ready to look at what's next coming from the farm system and Carson Bench and Jet Williams, these guys that have been up, they have gone through the toughest jump that you're going to as a ball player. That jump from the minors to the big leagues is as tough as you could possibly get. And there are a lot of learning experiences you need to go through to become a really good big leaguer. Because not everybody hits the ground running as some of the best in baseball are able to. For a lot of guys, it takes some time. And I think you've finally gotten, hopefully, through a lot of these peaks and valleys where these guys might start to just be solid everyday contributors. And I just hope the fan base can be patient enough with them now to let these guys go into the season and have their opportunity again, because I really think that they're going to step up in a big way next season. I still got my stock in Baty. I got my stock in Alvarez. And I think these guys will help out and be, really good players for the Mets next season. So we'll see what happens. On tomorrow's show, I want to go through Jeff McNeil's situation. Are the Mets going to trade him? Where could they trade him to? We'll have landing spots. I'll talk out the whole situation on the show. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you are watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day, not their second watch. Check out Locked On MLB Game Night if you want to check out a reaction right after the World Series, make sure you do so with Locked On MLB Game Night. Locked On MLB Game Night brings local analysis on a national scale. Find Locked On MLB Game Night on the Locked On MLB YouTube channel or wherever you listen to your podcasts.